Okay, dear friends, are there any questions, Bauke?
Yes, we have one question, and that is, with little children you see often this wonderment for life. And the question is if there's a relation between this wonderment of little children and a wonderment for the mystic or for later in life.
Yes, I think there is a relation. I think a lot of adults, grown-up people, are full with all kind of little facts, opinions, prejudices. They have learned to use their brain mind, to focus on all the outside things in the world. And in a way you have to empty yourself from all those opinions. Their opinions, they change every 3-4 years. You have other opinions, other fashions. So you have to empty yourself and try to have an open mind. And that doesn't mean that you say immediately yes at a new idea or immediately no. But just like Socrates said, you have to try to investigate it. And the better you are in assuming the idea that you really don't know anything about all those things which are beyond the outer world, helps you to empty your mind and helps you to, go to a higher level in your thinking so that you can really understand what is happening. Of course, there are a lot of things we know, and we don't have to ignore facts, scientific facts. We have you don't have to ignore them or say that they aren't true. I mean, gravity is a fact of life, so why ignore it? But I mean, all those opinions, all those prejudices, and we all have them. If we, like children, try to look at things as it were the first time we saw it, then it will help us to get our mind, our thinking to a higher level. And wonderment is the start, it's not the end. Wonderment is the start. Then you have to go on search and thinking, looking, investigating yourself, especially to find answers. So wonderment is not intuition, because intuition, you know what's happening, you have a clear vision on truth, but wonderment provokes the intuition in a human being.
So those children are at the start of gaining wisdom in a way.
That's why it's so important to give a good education to children, and don't put all those important facts in them, those opinions, but let them be full of wonderment, and then they will discover the truth themselves.
Okay, thank you. That was the only question.
Okay, wonderment. We told you that wonderment leads to philosophy, and that you have to apply philosophy in a disciplined way, which leads to mystic life. This is often presented as traveling on a path. And the metaphor of the path is found in many religions. Buddhism speaks of the eightfold path. The Sufis speak of a path to knowledge. It's, of course, an inner path. H.P. Blavatsky says in The Voice of the Silence, "Thou canst not travel on the path before thou hast become the path itself." With this, he clearly is saying two things. The path of the mystic is not a path that lies outside of you. It's not a physical path. It is a path which cannot be followed with the help of all kinds of external things. And by external things, I mean rituals, prayers, wearing certain clothes, eating certain food, and that kind of things. All those things may sometimes help or inspire one to walk the path, but they are at best tools. The path is actually the development of certain aspects in your own consciousness, aspects that are obviously not yet developed. But we possess them, we are them, they lie within us. Maybe they sleep, maybe they slumber, maybe they are half awake, but only when those inner aspects are fully awake, a human can walk this path and become a true mystic and enter other worlds. In one of the sacred books of Hinduism, Krishna says, to whatever place you want to go on this path, that place one's own self becomes. And Jesus should have said, I am the way, the life, and the truth. A mystic statement that is completely true, although it can only be uttered by one who has already walked the path and has become the path. The path is an inner journey of development which leads to access to other worlds. The mystic assumes a power which works behind or in this physical world, and this force, this power, consciousness as we may call it, can be traced back to a source. And the mystic wants to become the path to this source, and therefore he must develop still sleeping aspects within himself. Man is indeed a composite being. There are different eyes within us. There are different selves within us. Sometimes we are this I, this me, and sometimes we are another. Sometimes we are emotional, perhaps angry or jealous. Maybe sometimes we are an intellectual, or we are an idealistic or compassionate man or woman. Theosophy usually divides human consciousness into 7 aspects. Atman, the divine, Buddhi, the spiritual part within us, Manas, the mind, the capacity to think, Kama, desire, Prana, vitality, Linga Sharira, the astral part, and Stula Sharira, the physical. Now we can also group these aspects in a certain way so that it may become clearer what this inner path is, the path of the mystic. Well, this diagram may seem very complicated, especially when you see it for the first time. Don't get distracted to all the Sanskrit names. What does this diagram represent? Well, man is a stream of consciousness, the vertical line. That line is actually the path that you must become. In that stream of consciousness, there are different centers of consciousness, those circles here. And all those different centers of consciousness have different qualities, different characteristics. You find them here on the left side. And on the right side, you see the egos who express those qualities. First of all, there is Atman, our inner God, the divine ego. Then we have Jiv Atman, spiritual ego, our inner Buddha. Bud Atman, our inner master, the real human ego. And the personality, Pran Atman, or the personal ego. Now, who are we? We are all those characteristics, but yet at this moment, in this phase of our evolution, and I'm speaking of the average person, we are Pran Atman. We are the personality who lives in illusion, who identifies itself with the external world, which is nothing but a world of shadows. The path of the mystic includes that he becomes the higher centers of consciousness. Didn't Krishna say, to whatever place you want to go in this path, that place you become. So we have to become a master, a Buddha. We have to become a deity. However, these aspects are already present within us now. Now, to become does not mean that something completely new is conjured out of thin air, but that something which is already there comes to the surface. It's like unwrapping a gift. This is a very important fact to be aware of. We are a master, we are a Buddha, we are a God, maybe only in the distant future, but if you steadily put one foot in front of the other, if you constantly develop yourself, then one day you will be able to say, like Jesus in the New Testament, I am the way, I am life, the life, and the truth. And this awareness of what we essentially are is actually the first step on the mystic path. You hear the whispers of your higher self, which your personality initially interprets as wonderment. The initially vague awareness that you are essentially a divine being is the first phase of mystic life. And perhaps you don't think in terms as divine, but simply the realization dawns in you that you are more than what you are now. You realize that you are, and of course all other human beings as well, that you are essentially a noble being. The first awareness of what you really are will slowly appear on the horizon of your consciousness. Just like the darkness of the night does not change into the light in a short moment. For there is always twilight between night and day. Slowly you will begin to realize that the meaning of life is not to fulfill your material ambitions. It's not a pursuit of luxury, money, power. There are other values in life. And the greatest touchstone in this phase, this early phase of mystic life, is that you are happier for the sake of someone else than that you are happy for yourself. Being impersonal is the key word for assessing the gates on the path. It is the key not only for this phase, but for all the gates, all the barriers, all the obstacles that you will encounter. Being impersonal is also the guide, the compass on your inner journey. Raise above your personality. Now, this initial phase will lead to questions. You are entering the phase of philosophy, the phase of study, philosophy, the love of wisdom and the wisdom of love. You begin to search seriously for questions of life. Where do we come from? Where are we going to? Why is there suffering in the world? Slowly but steadily, the conviction dawns on you that the sensory perceptible world is nothing but the crust, the shell, the outer appearance, the sediment of inner wills. The external world is an illusion. Now arises the deep desire to penetrate behind the veil of illusion, which implies a different appreciation of outer life. By the way, the phase of studying does not mean that you attend lectures and you read books and that you reflect on the content of those books. That is, of course, very good to do, but it means also, above all, that you try to apply what you are studying in your daily life. Let me give you an example. You may have learned that the external world is an illusion. It is transitory. But if the main purpose in your life is a big house and expensive vacation, or maybe 2 vacations each year, then you don't really apply this knowledge. Yes, you can then rightly ask yourself whether you have understood anything at all. Or to give another example, you may have learned that universal brotherhood is a fact in nature, but if you participate in ethnic profiling at work, then you haven't really understood it. To study Theosophy, in whatever form, is therefore never only a theoretical study, but above all, a practical one. And to be able to practice it, you have to develop compassion. We are still talking about the first stages of the mystic path, the preparation of the journey. You know your destination and start packing your suitcase, but now you have to buy your tickets, and that means it is not uncommitted anymore. You cannot go back. There is a quote from Helena Blavatsky in which she talks about the steep and thorny road which leads to the heart of the universe and whose gate opens only inward and closes behind the neophyte evermore. So after each new stage, after each new gate through which the mystic passes, he cannot go back because the gate closes behind him forever. That sounds a little bit scary. It sounds like the song Hotel California. You can check in anytime you want, but you can never leave. Does that mean that you enter in a kind of prison, that you are being imprisoned by others, that your free will is shut down? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It is a very simple psychological phenomenon. When you know something, when you have seen something, when you have experienced something with your inner eye, your inner being, then you can never pretend that you don't know it. Then you cannot do as if you haven't seen it. This is true for even the simplest things in your life. You've lived next door to your neighbor for years, but you don't really know anything about him. But then you find out that he is a very wise man and that he does beautiful things. Once you know that, you cannot live without that knowledge. You can pretend you don't know, but then you are only fooling yourself. Well, this also applies to inner knowledge. From the moment you have understood that this outer world is an illusion and that brotherhood is a fact in nature, or that you have some knowledge of your own higher nature, then you cannot negate that wisdom. You can live as if you don't know it. You can pretend you don't know it, but then again, you are only fooling yourself. And so this means that the gate closes behind you forever. Now, you may say, it may be, that this first phase is enough for you. That you are happy and you don't really want to go any further. You can do wonderful things. You can be a source of joy and light for those around you. You may think, this is it. This is enough for this life. But there are also those who say, and these are the few, no, I want to continue on the path. I want to become my inner master. Yes, my inner Buddha, the inner God. I want to take, as it says in the New Testament, I want to take the kingdom of heaven by force. Then you belong to the few who take a pledge. A pledge to whom? To an organization, to a master, a leader? No, the path of the mystic is an inner path, and the pledge is to one's own higher self. Taking a pledge was common in all spiritual institutes in ancient times. The one who was admitted, the one who, to use the language of the mystery schools, knocked on the gate on the right way, had to take a pledge. No one forced him to knock on the gate. He himself asked to be let in. He has made a commitment, which is not without obligation. Knocking at the gate should not be taken literally. It is in fact the result of the first phase of the path. You have fulfilled all the conditions, so you have the key to go through that gate, provided that you promise your higher self that from now on you will live according to its will, the will of the higher self. You probably know the statement attributed to the Christ in the New Testament, not my will, but thine be done. Something similar you find in the Bhagavad Gita, where Arjuna says to Krishna, I will live according to your law. It is the personality who focuses on its higher self and makes the decision to subject its own desires and whims to the will of its inner divinity. In other words, the mystic on the path says, it will not be my personal will that will be the motivation in my life, but the motivation will be to live according to the principles of my higher self. Such a pledge is not optional. It's not a promise made by a politician, which after the election, if the circumstances change, can be revoked. You cannot say, yes, I didn't know. I didn't know that I would be in such dire situation. If I had known it, I wouldn't have taken the pledge, of course. The gate closes forever behind the neophyte. Occultism is not to be trifled with. Be brave, but not overconfident. If you think that you are not ready for this pledge, don't do it. Then you can live a wonderful and beautiful life and help your fellow human beings and support them and continue to grow in wisdom. And maybe you're ready for it in the next life. The decision is always up to the person himself. Well, in the Theosophical Society, the pledge was introduced in 1888 by H.P. Blavatsky in London. She had gathered around her a group of faithful disciples, hard-working students, who are ready to work, not only study, but to work for Theosophy. H.P. Blavatsky founded the esoteric section, the Eastern School, a group that was organizationally separate from the Theosophical Society, but whose members were also members of the Theosophical Society. H.P. Blavatsky was in charge, although the actual leadership rested by a master of wisdom and compassion. A goal was made. Members could join the esoteric session on the condition that they made a pledge to the higher self. And the pledge was as follows. I have summarized it somewhat. The full pledge you can find in the collected writings of H.P. Blavatsky or in the 12 volumes of the esoteric teachings of Gottfried the Peruker. Well, the first clause. I pledge myself to endeavor to make Theosophy a living factor in my life. Perhaps the most important clause of the pledge. In fact, it says, may you make Theosophy, divine wisdom, a living factor in your life. All your thoughts and your actions will be infused by universal love and compassion. That is the basis of everything. 2. I pledge myself to support before the world the Theosophical movement, its leaders, and its members. Remark, it doesn't say Theosophical society, but Theosophical movement. And to defend the Theosophical movement is, of course, a logical conclusion, unless you are like Peter and have denied your own teacher before the cock crows 3 times. How could you live Theosophia if you do not defend and support your teachers and your colleague students? 3. I pledge myself never to listen without protest to any evil thing spoken of a brother theosophist and to abstain from condemning others. 4. I pledge myself to maintain a constant struggle against my lower nature and to be charitable to the weaknesses of others. There is a struggle against the lower self. But this struggle is not so much about fighting against your unworthy thoughts, but to recognize the idea of brotherhood, of universal brotherhood, more and more and more clearly, so that the thoughts which are in conflict with it, and thus originate from the lower self, automatically die off. 5. I pledge myself to do all in my power by study or otherwise to fit myself to help and teach others. And it means study and apply what you have studied. Study again and apply on a better way, and so on. 6. I pledge myself to give what support I can to the Theosophical movement in time, money and work. Know that work well done brings more work. And 7, I pledge to maintain strict confidentiality with regard to all information, all documents and all that kind of things. They must therefore not be disclosed to third parties. So help me, my higher self. In the third part of this talk, we will look what happens to you if you take this pledge seriously. But first, there will be a break of 3 minutes. You may ask your questions, send us an email or use the chat function, and we will try to answer those questions first after the break. Okay, dear friends, there are some questions, I think, Bauke.
Yes, we received some questions. And the first one is, if philosophy begins with wonderment, the student must remain in a state of investigation, trying to go from unknowing to knowing. So can we say that he will never reach the end of this search?
Yeah, good question. Well, the main starting point of theosophy is the boundlessness. There's a boundless principle. So some people, they get tired when they hear it, but in fact, we always go on. There's always more to learn, always more to develop, because essentially we are a boundless being. Everything in the boundlessness is within us. And thanks the eternal gods, that is a fact in nature, because imagine that there was a border, there was a frontier, and you could not go over it. There was an end point. You could not learn anymore. That would be the hell. You couldn't have, you couldn't meet other peoples. You couldn't have new experiences. It was all already done. So the Christians probably don't know that their heaven, in fact, is a hell if there is no way to develop more. So, in fact, there is always wonderment, even for the gods, there is wonderment, of course, on a very high level, a level that we cannot imagine. At least I cannot imagine that level, but I, applying the law as above, so below, there must be wonderment for the gods as well. In their realms, in their lives, would also new wonderment, new philosophy, applying the philosophy in a defined way, and then they have something new, new mystics, etc., etc. So there is always more. Excelsior, always higher, always higher, always, and there is no end to it. And we should realize that because, it helps us to avoid a dogmatic way of thinking that we know it. In fact, that is what Socrates would have done if he was dogmatic. He would have said when the oracle said that he was the wisest, okay, I'm the wisest. Now he investigated it. So we have to investigate ever more and more and more and more. That doesn't mean that we cannot find truth. We can find truth, of course. But truth and reality, there is a more sublime truth. There is a higher reality, and so on and so on. To give you an example, it is true that the three triangles, the three corners of a triangle are 180 degrees. That's the truth. But if you make a triangle in space, and with the curving of the space, they are not 180 degrees. So that doesn't mean that here on Earth it is a truth that the three corners of a triangle are 180, but it's limited, it's relative. And that's with all those things. We know truths, but they are relative. And if you keep in mind that all the truths you find are relative, you will always have an open mind for greater, more sublime truths. Yes? Another question?
Certainly, because the next one is concerning this process. And someone says, in this process of learning more and more, he says he feels like an astronaut sometimes. Because there's always more to understand, and sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming. And his question is, how can you best deal with this?
I'm going to answer that question in the third part. I may say that's a very normal and common thing that it is overwhelming. And if I didn't answer the question correctly, please, in the third part, you may answer your question again.
Okay, perfect. And the last for now is someone asking, is the higher self you are talking about, is that another being than I am?
Oh, that's a difficult one. Well, in fact, we are all essentially one. There is no difference between me and you, between me and a dog or a plant or a mineral or whatever, because we are all essentially the boundless. The difference between you and me and between me and a plant and a dog is the way we express, we manifest what we are inwardly. So, for instance, a human being expresses the capacity to think. In Sanskrit it's called manas, whereas beasts, animals or plants don't do that yet. In the future they will. So the difference between you and me and between all those entities, all those beings, is the way they express what they are in the deepest of their heart, of their heart, of their heart. So we may identify ourselves as an individual human being, for instance, with our body. Then we are our body. We may identify ourselves with our feelings or our desires. Then we are those feelings, those desires. Then we are in fact a human animal. We may identify ourselves with our personality. The mask thinking that we are, in my case, Barend, or in another case, Mr. Jones or Mrs. I don't know who, yeah? But we can identify ourselves also what is behind the mask, behind, okay, personality means mask, behind our personality. And sometimes we do. And then we are, maybe just for a few moments, we are more than the personality. And sometimes we may completely altruistic, full of compassion. Then we are, for a short moment, a Buddha, a short moment. And we can learn to develop always more and more and more from those inner aspects in our consciousness. Now, the higher self is a word that in fact is, all those higher aspects in ourselves. You know, if you remember the egg diagram, the inner master, the inner Buddha, and the inner God, if you take those three together, you may call it the higher self. Are we it? Yes, we are it. Do we express it? Most of us don't express that higher self yet. But we are going to express it. The little baby, 3 months old, is that baby, is that little girl or that little boy already the grown-up adult who is studying at the university? Not yet. But latent, it is already the student or maybe the professor at the university. So we are our higher self, but we have to develop it. I hope that's an answer. And if you want to know more, I can recommend you to follow the course Thinking Differently, because then you learn to distinguish all those aspects in your consciousness, and you learn to identify with the higher aspects. So then you will sooner and quicker way become your higher self.
Thank you, Barend. That are the questions for now. Yeah.
Okay. Good. What happens to a human being who takes a plan?